Flight attendant kicks elderly black woman. 7 minutes later, no she owns airline. The first-class cabin was bustling as passengers settled into their seats for the long-haul flight from Seoul to San Francisco. Among the travelers was an elderly black woman named Clara Bennett, wearing a modest but elegant suit and carrying herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen the world and thrived in it. She moved deliberately, her cane tapping gently against the carpeted floor as she searched for her seat. Behind her, a young flight attendant named Jenny Kim watched impatiently. Jenny prided herself on maintaining the luxury airline's perfect image, but she couldn't suppress a flicker of disdain as Clara took her time. Jenny's thoughts betrayed her. Asterisk. Why is she even in first class? This can't be right. Clara finally reached her seat and smiled warmly at Jenny, asking politely if she could help stow her bag in the overhead compartment. Jenny huffed, muttering under her breath, "You're holding up the line," before snatching the bag from Clara's hand and roughly shoving it into the compartment. Clara winced but said nothing, settling into her seat with remarkable composure. Minutes later, the boarding process was complete, and the flight attendant began her safety demonstration. As Jenny moved through the aisle, she passed Clara, who was adjusting her blanket. Without warning, Jenny kicked the cane leaning against Clara's seat. It clattered to the floor, and Jenny snapped, "Keep your belongings out of the aisle, you're a hazard!" Gasps filled the cabin. Passengers turned to stare, their eyes flickering between the elderly woman and the hostile flight attendant. Clara's expression remained calm, but her hands tightened on the armrests. A man in a military uniform, sitting a few rows behind, stood up and approached Jenny. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice authoritative and steady. "This is none of your business," Jenny replied sharply. The man's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Clara raised a hand to stop him. "It's all right," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Let's not escalate this." Jenny smirked, clearly feeling vindicated, and marched back to the galley. Clara looked up at the man who had intervened and gave him a grateful nod. The man returned to his seat, but his sharp gaze stayed fixed on Jenny, as if memorizing her every move. 7 minutes passed. Then, the captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming the passengers and announcing the flight's cruising altitude. Clara reached into her bag, pulled out a sleek tablet, and began typing. A few passengers whispered among themselves, clearly outraged at Jenny's behavior. Meanwhile, Jenny remained oblivious, continuing her duties with a self-satisfied air. As the flight continued, the murmurs grew louder. Word of the incident spread throughout the cabin. A fellow flight attendant approached Jenny nervously, whispering something in her ear. Jenny glanced toward Clara, her face pale. Clara had made a call, a very important call. Moments later, the captain stepped out of the cockpit and approached Clara with a respectful bow. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "on behalf of the airline, I deeply apologize for what just happened. I assure you this will be handled immediately." Jenny froze, her tray of drinks trembling in her hands. "Why are you apologizing to her?" she demanded, her voice shrill. The captain turned to Jenny, his expression cold. "Do you even know who this woman is?" Jenny scoffed. "I don't care who she is." The captain's eyes narrowed. "She owns this airline." The cabin fell silent. Jenny's face turned ashen as the weight of the captain's words sank in. Clara owned the airline, but that wasn't all. Clara set down her tablet and looked up, her calm demeanor now tinged with a quiet authority. "And," Clara said, her voice carrying across the cabin, "I'm also the largest real estate investor in South Korea. You might have heard of the Bennett Towers in Gangnam. I built those." Jenny's knees nearly buckled. The Bennett Towers were legendary, a symbol of opulence and success in the heart of Seoul. Realizing the depth of her mistake, Jenny stammered, I didn't know." Clara raised a hand to silence her. "Ignorance is no excuse for poor behavior, but you'll have plenty of time to reflect on that. Consider this your last flight as an employee of my airline." As Clara's words settled over the cabin, Jenny's panic turned to dread. She looked to the passengers for sympathy but found only disapproving glares. Meanwhile, the man in the military uniform approached Clara again. "Thank you for handling this with such grace," he said. Clara smiled. "Thank you for standing up for me, I appreciate it." He nodded. "My name's Major Bennett, by the way. Clara's my wife." Jenny's mouth fell open. Not only was Clara a powerful businesswoman, but her husband was a high-ranking officer. The combination of their influence made her regret her actions more than ever. As the flight continued, Jenny was relegated to menial tasks in the back of the plane, her career effectively over. Clara, meanwhile, enjoyed the rest of the journey in peace, her quiet dignity inspiring respect from everyone around her. As the hours passed, Clara remained poised, her tablet propped up as she reviewed documents and exchanged emails with her team back in South Korea. The cabin crew, now acutely aware of who she was, treated her with the utmost care, offering refreshments and checking in often. But Clara, ever gracious, waved them off with a polite smile, choosing instead to keep to herself. Jenny, relegated to the back galley, stood in stunned silence. Every time she caught the other flight attendants glancing her way, she felt the weight of their judgment. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind, each detail sharpening her regret. Yet the sinking realization that it was too late to undo her actions gripped her with an unbearable dread. The flight landed at San Francisco International Airport earlier than expected. The captain himself came to escort Clara off the plane, an honor typically reserved for heads of state or royalty. As she stepped into the jet bridge, passengers applauded, a spontaneous outpouring of respect that left Jenny trembling. Clara turned before exiting, her gaze landing briefly on Jenny. For a moment, Jenny thought Clara might speak to her, offer some parting words, but Clara merely nodded at the captain and walked away. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Jenny remained frozen in place as the rest of the passengers filed out. The other attendants avoided her entirely, their disapproval palpable. When the plane finally emptied, Jenny's manager was waiting at the gate with a grim expression. She was asked to hand over her badge and uniform before being escorted to a small office for a formal dismissal. No explanations, no appeals. Her career with the airline had ended as swiftly as Clara's quiet, powerful words had dictated. Outside the airport, a sleek black car waited for Clara. Major Bennett stood by the passenger door, waiting with the same respectful demeanor he had displayed on the plane. As Clara approached, she allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you for coming all this way," she said. "Wouldn't miss it," Major Bennett replied, holding the door open for her. As Clara settled into the car, he climbed in beside her, his military precision evident in every movement. As the car pulled away, Clara leaned back into the plush leather seat and sighed. "Do you think I was too harsh?" Major Bennett chuckled softly. "You handled it perfectly, as always. But I admit, watching her face when she realized who you were, that was something else." Clara allowed herself a rare laugh, her shoulders relaxing. "It's not about who I am," she said. "It's about the principle. People like her think they can treat others however they want, without consequence. Someone needed to show her otherwise." Major Bennett nodded, reaching over to take her hand. "You've always been good at that." The car wove through the bustling streets of San Francisco, heading toward the luxury hotel where Clara's next business meeting awaited. She had only a few hours before she would step into yet another boardroom to discuss an ambitious project, a multi-billion-dollar real estate venture that would redefine urban living in the city. But for now, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. The flight had been an unexpected ordeal, but it reminded her why she worked so hard. Her journey from a young girl growing up in Alabama to becoming a powerhouse in South Korea's real estate industry hadn't been easy. She had faced countless obstacles, many of them rooted in the same prejudice Jenny had shown her today. But each challenge had only fueled her determination to rise above and carve out a legacy of strength, dignity, and success. As the car pulled up to the hotel, Clara straightened her jacket and prepared to step into her world again. Major Bennett squeezed her hand lightly before letting go. "Let's make some waves," he said with a smile. Clara stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement, and walked into the hotel with the grace and confidence of someone who had not just survived but thrived against all odds. The world around her was hers to shape, and no fleeting moment of ignorance or cruelty could ever take that away. Drop a comment if you enjoyed this story. It doesn't cost you anything, and you'll make me very happy. Thank you, and I look forward to your like.